What if Judas never betrayed Jesus? A cool wind moves through the olive leaves, a torch sputters, sandals crunch on gravel. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster yawns at a dawn still hours away. In the canonical story, this is the night that pivots the world. A kiss under moonlight marks a man for capture. But what if that kiss never happens? What if the pouch of silver never leaves a trembling hand, and the whisper to the guards never meets the air? Tonight, we follow a single untaken step and trace its echoes through faith, culture, and history. Before we turn the key to this alternate door, we need to understand the room we're in. The Gospels tell us that Judas Iscariot was one of the 12, handpicked, a close companion who walked dusty roads with Jesus. As the city of Jerusalem swelled for Passover, Jesus taught in the temple courtyards, drawing crowds and attention from religious authorities wary of unrest. The tension was a woven rope. Temple leaders feared a riot, Romans feared rebellion, and disciples sensed something was coming. At a meal often called the Last Supper, Jesus broke bread and passed a cup, words of covenant and sacrifice hanging in the candlelit air. He predicted that one of his friends would betray him. Judas, already in league with the authorities for 30 pieces of silver, slipped into the night. Later, in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed in anguish and the disciples fought sleep, Judas arrived guiding a mix of temple guards and armed men. He identified Jesus by greeting him with a kiss. An intimate sign turned into a signal. Jesus was arrested, questioned by religious leaders, sent to the Roman governor Pontius Pilate, condemned and crucified. Christians believe that on the third day he rose. As for Judas, the gospel accounts speak of remorse, returning the silver, and a tragic end, his name passing into language as a synonym for treachery. That is the familiar road. Now, the untraveled path. What if Judas doesn't make the deal? Perhaps he walks into the high priest's courtyard and then turns away, heart pounding. Perhaps he meets their eyes and says, no. Or perhaps he takes the silver, and at the last moment, refuses to play his part, swallowing the directions, gripping the purse so tightly it creases his palm. In our scenario, he chooses not to betray that night. Watch the line of events loosen and reweave. Without Judas's signal, the authorities lose their guide to a quiet arrest. They still want Jesus, but the city is volatile. Crowds fill the streets. The air tangles with Roman patrols and festival songs. The guards can't risk seizing a popular teacher in full daylight. They fear stones and shouts. So they wait, maybe one more night, maybe many. Jesus, who is not hiding, continues to teach. He moves between the Mount of Olives and the temple, speaking in parables that leave some beaming and others seething. The trap door they hope to drop him through doesn't open. How long does the delay last? Days, perhaps weeks. In that breathing room, tiny shifts become tectonic. The disciples, seeing their friend still free, grow more attentive. Judas, still among them, becomes a quieter presence, his inner storm visible only in the way he stares into the middle distance when others laugh. Jesus continues to challenge authority in measured, poetic ways. He speaks of the kingdom of God, of mercy and justice, of the first being last. His words echo through the porticos where merchants complain about traffic and priests glance over at the gathering clusters sitting cross-legged on stone. The tension does not vanish, because it was never just about one traitor. It was about collision, of message and power, of hope and control. Yet without the precise timing of a nocturnal arrest guided by a friend, the story's rhythm changes. The Passover ends. Pilgrims roll up mats, pack bread and song, and turn toward home. The crowds thin. The authorities exhale. The fear of riot recedes a notch. Rome counts coins and keeps marching. If the arrest comes later, it may look different. It might be public in daylight, a measured seizure rather than a midnight ambush. Jesus, known by face and voice, no longer needs introduction. A daytime arrest carries new dynamics. Witnesses, noise, the chance for a final teaching, a farewell glance that is not swallowed by shadows. Without the intimate sting of a kiss, betrayal loses its icon. It becomes something else. State action against a disruptive rabbi. That difference matters to memory. But step back and ask the big question at the center of Christian faith. Would the crucifixion still happen? Many Christians hold that Jesus' death and resurrection are the core. In this speculative exercise, we treat theology with care. The institutions that opposed him, religious and imperial, did not hinge entirely on Judas's choice. They were larger than one man's turn. So, in one version of this alternate timeline, the confrontation still comes. Later, perhaps after a summer of teaching and movement building in the countryside. Jesus is arrested publicly, tried by the council, handed to Rome, and executed. The cross still stands, but its path is not lined with a friend's betrayal. In another version, the delay changes the outcome more dramatically. Jesus travels after Passover, and his following swells in Galilee again. The authorities, recalculating, decide that prosecuting a teacher loved by the common people is more trouble than it's worth, at least for a season. He becomes a constant moral pressure rather than a sudden martyr. The story of salvation, in this case, would be told through decades of teaching rather than days of passion. It's an enormous shift, one that would reshape doctrines and liturgies down to their syllables. We won't push past respect here. Instead, let's explore the social and cultural ripples of each branch to see how one night without a kiss might ripple across centuries. First, consider the meaning of Judas's name. In the world we inherited, Judas became shorthand for traitor. Medieval poets placed him beside monsters, and painters gave him shadowed eyes and a crooked purse. In our alternate line, the name is not a byword. It remains simply Judah, a common, even honorable name, signaling a tribe, a people, a heritage. Children named Judas grow up without the weight of a hiss in the syllables. Language takes longer to coin a single word for betrayal. Perhaps we borrow from another story or another culture to name that wound. Art changes with language, and language changes with art. Without that kiss in the garden, 1,000 paintings alter their focal points. The famous scene of the Last Supper keeps its hush and mystery, but the drama roiling it would turn from betrayal to the tremble of impending conflict. Artists fixate on bread and hands, on a teacher's face contemplating the cost of his message, rather than on a man leaning back into shadow. There are still powerful paintings of trials and crucifixions if that path remains, but the visual vocabulary of treachery loses its mascot. The Judas kiss never becomes a phrase. Instead, perhaps another symbol rises. A broken reed, a dropped stone, a torn scroll. Anything that captures the moment authority tries to silence truth. The early church, forming like morning dew along the edges of empire, would tell its stories differently. If the arrest is delayed in public, the sermons later recorded in Acts and letters might emphasize open confrontation with power more than a secret betrayal. Peter's speeches would still thrum with urgency, but his tone might shift slightly. Not, "You betrayed and killed," but, "You turned away from mercy in the light of day." If the crucifixion still happens, Easter moves forward with a slightly altered mood. The resurrection is no less astonishing. Grief is no less real. Joy no less explosive. But the narrative that scholars and pastors return to, about friends who failed, about forgiveness extended even to those who handed him over, becomes less focused on Judas and more on the fragility of crowds and councils. Judas himself, quieter in the margins, might be remembered not as a villain but as a disciple who wrestled with doubt and, at a crucial moment, chose not to abandon his teacher. Imagine the sermons built on that, about turning back from the edge, about the power of a second chance. Pause and consider the humanities. Theater without Judas's betrayal becomes a stage that leans into philosophical conflict rather than a single intimate treason. Playwrights dramatize the debates between Jesus and authorities, the tension between Roman order and prophetic imagination. Composers score crescendos for courtroom scenes instead of garden captures. In literature, betrayal still exists, but when a friend betrays a friend, authors reach for different metaphors. The word Judas does not flash from their pens like a shorthand curse. Mercy might find other faces and other names to wear. Historically, certain dark currents flowed from misreadings and misuses of the Passion story. Over centuries, some people aimed blame at entire communities, using the image of betrayal to justify prejudice. In a world where the pivotal betrayal never occurs, some of that fuel is absent. It does not erase humanity's capacity for bias, but it removes a recurring hook that history too often grabbed. Teaching about the Passion, Liturgies that remember those events might emphasize shared responsibility and shared need for grace. The story's warning finger points not at a caricature of an outsider, but at the all-too-human temptation to protect power at truth's expense. Even politics might feel the tremor. If the arrest and trial are public and not hidden by a secret sign, the message becomes less about clandestine schemes and more about systems making choices in daylight. Movements for justice often take strength from stories like that. Protesters quote lines about truth and power, about a teacher requiring the authorities to own their decisions. The Midnight Garden no longer stands as the emblem. Instead, a sunny courtyard or a bright stone plaza becomes the stage for reflection on courage. And what of the inner circle? Peter, James, John. Their arcs trace differently across the sky without this betrayal. Peter's denial under the pressure of questions may still happen in the heat of a public trial, or it might unfold another way. But suppose Judas's act is one of loyalty rather than treachery. That could create a living parable among the 12 themselves. The one many would later suspect of betrayal becomes the one who tried to protect. Early communities might tell a treasured story about a former tax collector, a zealot, and a man named Judas who learned to sit at the same table when it would have been easier to walk away. It's a subtle shift, but subtlety shapes souls over time. In the longer arc scenario, the one where the crucifixion is delayed for months or years, the Christian movement might crystallize differently. The earliest gatherings would center on parables, meals, and works of mercy expanded across more seasons. The cross would not be absent from teaching, because it already hung over Roman roads and haunted Judean hills. But its association with Jesus might be more gradual. If, in this line, the crucifixion does not occur or occurs much later without Passover's timing, the festival calendar of the church would change. Instead of Holy Week as we know it, there might be a Feast of the Teachings, a midsummer remembrance of confrontations in the temple, or a winter fast recalling a long journey through Galilee. The bread and cup from that upper room would still carry weight, but perhaps the emphasis lands on the shared table and the command to love one another. The memory of a community almost torn by suspicion and held together by choice. Now let's return to the Judas at the center of our what if. If he does not betray, where does he go? The Gospels, as we have them, do not narrate a post-betrayal life of discipleship for him. In our scenario, he remains, face open to rebuke from friends who suspected him and to the forgiveness that marks Jesus' ministry. He might become a living cautionary tale about desire, about how close we all stand to trading our convictions for comfort, and a living encouragement about the possibility of turning around before it's too late. His story would become a lantern held low for those who think they are beyond repair. Here is one who stood on the edge and stepped back. Half a world away and centuries later, language classrooms are quieter. A teacher holds up a list of idioms, searching for one that means a friend who betrays a friend with a greeting. The students blink. There is no famous phrase for that. Maybe they write on the board, a counterfeit kiss. It never sticks. The class moves on. The history of words always remembers the stories that gave them shape. When a story bends, the dictionary bends with it. Quick pause. If Judas chose loyalty, what single consequence would matter most to you? Faith, history, or art? If this kind of careful what-if exploration speaks to you, tap like and subscribe so you'll catch our next journey. Ripples continue. Pilgrimage routes might draw travelers less to gardens of betrayal and more to public squares of courage. Artists carve bas-reliefs of debates under colonnades instead of nocturnal processions with lanterns. Children's storybooks highlight teamwork among the disciples, weaving in a chapter where one friend nearly walks away and then returns, ashamed but embraced. The moral lessons lean into perseverance and second chances rather than warning only against treachery. And yet, the dark remains present, because it is honest. Without the Judas moment, humanity still knows betrayal. Friends still fail friends. Systems still fail the vulnerable. The drama of conscience versus convenience plays out everywhere from kitchen tables to Senate floors. The difference in this timeline is symbolic. Our cultural anchor for personal betrayal is less fixed to this one ancient scene. We look elsewhere to name the spear that enters from the side. Perhaps it's Greek myth, or a medieval court, or a modern espionage tale that provides the signature metaphor. The gospel narrative, in turn, becomes a place we visit to grapple with power and mercy, to look at daylight decisions made under the eyes of a crowd. Scholars in this world still debate, because that is what scholars do, about how different doctrines took shape. Without the Judas betrayal, those studies show a greater emphasis on Jesus' teachings in early creeds and hymns, with phrases drawn from parables and proclamations before they circle tightly around the cross. When the cross appears, it arrives as the culmination of public, hard-fought confrontations, rather than as the endpoint of a chain yanked by a conspirator. Even the way we draw the sign of the cross on walls and chest might carry slightly different weight. Less about the sting of a friend's failure, more about the courage to stand in public for truth. In art museums, a curious absence catches the eye of viewers who know our world. There is no painting of a kiss ringed by torches that has entered every textbook. Instead, 3 masterpieces dominate the hall. One shows Jesus standing calmly in a sunlit courtyard, while officials consult scrolls and soldiers look unsure. Another shows the 12 arguing softly over a meal, then falling silent as Jesus says something that makes their eyes shine. The third shows an empty hillside at dawn, not a tomb mouth, but a place where a teacher and students will soon gather again. Each is honest, and each is gentle, dark notes still sounding, but the melody less haunted by the word that begins with J. The practicalities of history cannot be ignored. Rome was Rome. Its empire did not calibrate itself to the presence of idealists. If our branch of time still leads to crucifixion, and many would argue it likely does, even without Judas, then the heart of Christian proclamation remains. The story turns on a love that endures suffering and a hope that outlives graves. What changes is the taste of the story on the tongue. In sermons and songs, fewer lines begin with or hinge upon the specter of a friend's kiss. Pastors point less to the danger of a single heart gone wrong, and more to the responsibility of institutions and crowds. The call to self-examination does not weaken. It widens from, "Might I be a Judas?" to, "Might I join a crowd that cheers fairness and then votes for convenience?" Imagine, too, the quiet conversations that fill kitchens and porches. A parent, telling the story to a child, lingers not on the coin purse, but on the choice to stand firm when the world tugs. The child hears that people, even teachers' friends, sometimes want to quit or give up or find shortcuts. But tonight, this friend did not. That bedtime story plants a seed, and in some future cafeteria or office, the fruit appears as someone says, softly, "I'm staying loyal. I don't care if it's harder." In the end, our what-if is a mirror held up not to a single man in an ancient grove, but to each of us. Because behind the question about Judas lies a question about time itself. How much hangs on our smallest choices? A kiss, a coin, a nod to a guard. These are tiny things with enormous shadows. Turn one the other way, and the night reshapes. Whether or not the cross still stands in this alternate world, whether Easter finds a different street on the calendar, the quieter revolution is this. The story we tell about failure and forgiveness, about complicity and courage, becomes gentler, steadier, perhaps kinder. And that story, in any timeline, matters. We close where we began, beneath olive leaves glinting under a pale moon. The torches do not appear on the hill. The grass remembers footsteps that do not come. Somewhere in the city, a purse lies unopened in a drawer, and a man whose name would have been a hiss sleeps without nightmares for the first time in weeks. Morning is still on its way. Whatever it brings, the world has a new chance to decide what a friend's loyalty can prevent, and what a public courage must still face. This is only a thought experiment, speculative, not doctrinal, a respectful wandering through possibility. But sometimes a gentle what-if can soften hearts enough to notice the choices we hold right now. In a garden, in a hallway, at the edge of a decision, we can turn toward light and refuse to furnish the darkness with another easy symbol. The story you and I live in this world, with these breaths, is not yet fixed. We can choose the unbetrayed night,